first and a boy second. His spouse suffered from a debilitating mental illness following the birth of their children, and she required extensive hospitalization throughout her life. His daughter married, and she had 2 children, a son first and a daughter, so that was flipped in reverse. His son married but had no children. His son suffered from the same debilitating mental illness as his mother. Unable to work, he established a trust fund for his son and purchased a small house for him. He was a respected member of the American Institute of Architects, the Hamilton Club, and the Elks Club. He was a Rotarian. He resided in 5 different homes in the city of Lancaster. He was a lifelong Republican. He traveled to Europe 5 times. And last but not least, his projects were always over budget. All true. All those 18 bullet points, of course, you're looking and thinking, yeah, well, that's the guy I'm talking about, right? Well, that is true. Everything I read to you is the personal life of Cassius Emlyn Urban, the architect. Everything I read to you is the personal life of your speaker. Everything. Right down to marrying a high school sweetheart with the last name of Jenny, or the first name of Jenny. Right down to their mental illness following birth of our 2 children, the same birth order of our 2 children, the same birth order of our grandchildren. Mr. Urban and I went to the Fulton Bank, 90 years apart, to set up a trust fund for our sons because of their illness. We bought them small homes because they couldn't support themselves. Now you know why I wrote the book? I didn't know this when I started. This came with research. And the more we researched about Mr. Urban's life, the more I realized it's actually my personal life. Everything that he was doing, he did well before I did, but we tracked exactly the same. Second born, 5th generation, father relationships, the whole thing was just, in so many facets, just blows my mind of how that could absolutely be possible. The parallels are too weird in many respects. So as architects, there we are, a young architect, and he's also young. Actually, in that photograph, he's younger than I. He's, in that photograph, 62, and in this photograph, I'm 73. You age differently back then. So as architects, this is what we do. John knows this. We always like axes. Everything's all about geometry and angles and mathematics. So look at that. We have that in common. We tilt our head exactly the same way. We part our hair on the same side. That's pretty cool. But the thing that just blows my mind, we have no DNA connection. For all the parallels, we have no DNA connection. I am not related to him one iota. However, we happen to have exactly the same ears. Am I right? Look at that. Isn't that crazy? We have the exact same ears. So that's kind of crazy in itself, too. All right, so let's look at Mr. Urban. I want to tell you a little bit about him, just to give you some background on him. Born in 1863, in February. That was during the Civil War, of course, and that would have been winter encampment. So the war really settled down in the cold months and then heated up in the spring through the summer and fall. So 1863, he was born in Conestoga. That's 7 miles south of Lancaster City. Back then it was called Conestoga Square, actually. And he was born out of wedlock. So his parents were not married when they had him and when they had his older daughter. Or his older daughter. So, older sister. Thank you, Marty. And so born out of wedlock, and when Urban was 10 years old, then they moved to the city of Lancaster. So that winter encampment is when Dad was home on occasion, and when he got home, you know what they were doing to have kids. That's why they were born out of wedlock. After the war, then they got married. And they went on to have 3 more children after that, for a total of 5, which I came from a family of 5 kids as well. So when young Urban was 10 years old, his father, a carpenter, moved the entire family to the 400 blocks of South Queen Street and lived in a small 2-story brick home. downtown, and at the same time, he decided to make a planing mill. So his father, a carpenter, established a planing mill with a partner named Berger. And they were making doors and window sash and shutters and staircases, everything architectural they were building. That's where young Urban got his interest in building and architecture from his dad's relationship with woodworking. And so young Urban, this was only 1 block from his house. So after school, young Urban would go to his father's planing mill and sit on the second floor office and look through the books that he had. Young Urban, remember I said he struggled with academics? I did too. He went to the boys' high school, graduated in the year 1880. That high school was on Orange Street in the city. And he graduated tied for last place. Now, I wasn't that bad, but not really good, but tied for last place. But you know what's really interesting? Tied for last place, but he also delivered the valedictorian address, which is often and should be offered to the person with the highest scholastic score, not the lowest. The reason that happened back in 1880, the faculty requested that the students, graduating students, write a valedictorian address as if they were delivering it, and they were submitted in blind envelopes. So the faculty didn't know who wrote what. They selected his, the dumbbell, in the class, and he delivers it. Now, back in 1880, the ceremonies were held in what we call the Fulton Theater today. So back then, it was an auditorium. No slope seats, it was a flat floor. Newspaper accounts indicate that young Urban stood on that stage behind the podium and delivered his valedictorian address to a full packed house of people. And when he was finished delivering the address, the audience rose to their feet, gave him a standing ovation. And they would not stop applauding this 17-year-old boy until he came out from behind the podium and took a bow. Then they sat down and the commencement. Isn't that amazing? Imagine how he felt, struggling with academics, writing the address, delivering it to a standing ovation. That is really, really cool. So following high school, he did not have the financial resources nor the grades to go to a university. Didn't exist. And there were only 4 architectural programs in the United States at the time. So he elected to do apprenticing. So he went to Scranton and Philadelphia. In Philadelphia, he apprenticed for this guy, Willis Gaylord Hale. He was Philadelphia's most notorious architect for doing really beautiful things and really ugly things. So he was a renegade architect that had pros and cons about his work. He designed his own office building. John, where are you? So yeah. He designed his own office building called the Hale Building, and it was basically denounced as the ugliest building in the city of Philadelphia. It looks like a sandcastle on steroids. It's just, and it's still there. It's down at Broad and Chestnut, and they recently restored it. It's really ugly. So why, we do not know why Urban selected this kind of wild man to apprentice, but it was good for him because he learned to be brave. He learned to be bold, do things differently, don't always follow the norm, step outside and do something unique and something different. And that's what he did. So what we just discovered about 5 months ago, Urban actually returned to the city of Lancaster with only 3.5 years of apprenticing. So apprenticing meant he worked under the tutelage of Mr. Hale. But at the age of 20, he felt strong enough and bold enough to return to Lancaster City and set up shop. At the age of 20, he said, I'm ready to practice architecture. John, were you ready at 20? I was far from ready at 20. And so he established first office was in his dad's planing mill. The second office was in Penn Square. None of those buildings are there today. But he had a little office on the second floor above the Western Union building. He realized at a young age that in order to be a success and to grow your business, you need to have clients. How brilliant. And you need to have clients that have money. Otherwise, they can't afford to pay you to do anything. He quickly realized there were 2 gentlemen in the city called Watt and Shand. Did you ever hear of them? Well, they were the wealthiest business people in the city at that time. He saw an advertisement in the newspaper that Watt and Shand had an office for rent. So he bellied up and he became their tenant. And within a year or two of being a tenant, he was designing the mansion for Peter T. Watt called Rosslyn, which is out at President Avenue. So he had a very magnetic personality, obviously, to win commissions like that. He also realized this was not a really posh address being, a tenant in a department store. So he realized that there was a new building up on North Queen Street called the Lancaster Trust Building. So he moved his office from Watt and Shand to this beautiful building. That's on the first block. It would be next to was TMB. You may remember that men's clothing, Reams Jeweler. It's in that neck of the woods. So he stayed there for a couple years until the next big building arrived in Lancaster City, which was the Frank Woolworth building. And that's when he said, now I have an address. So he basically left the trust building, moved here in 1901, finished out his entire career with an office in that building on the 4th floor. That was a very posh address. That got taken down, unfortunately. Probably the most beautiful building in our city. And Urban did all the work. He did not design it, but he did all the work. He and Frank Woolworth were best friends, as was some guy named Milton Hershey, the old Lancastrians, and they were all members of the Hamilton Club as well. So that's where his office was. So how did I get involved? Well, in 2017, I was downtown Lancaster at the Monument, and I was just taking sort of a mental inventory of all the buildings that were close to the Monument. And adding them all up, it came out to be over 40 buildings that Urban designed. Mr. Urban designed 40 buildings within arm's length of the Monument. That's incredible. Absolutely mesmerizing to have that many buildings that close. And not only that, but they represented 21 styles of architecture. So in architecture, we would design buildings in a designated style. It's like clothing. And so that's a sort of menu of architectural styles from the 1800s, early 1900s. Think of them as a language. You have to understand the language of Tudor revival to design a building that says, oh, look, I'm Tudor, or I'm Chateauesque, or I'm Edwardian eclecticism. Think of it as a language. He spoke 21 languages. The normal architect would speak 12. So he was gung-ho about learning and doing things really, really well. Not only did he speak 21 languages, but this guy with a high school diploma, tied for last place, also designed in 54 different types of buildings. That's a menu of different building types. John knows, I know, when you're commissioned to design a building you've never done before, you've got to research it. You've got to understand how to design a hospital, how to design something as silly as a cow barn on the lower right, or a science lab for Franklin and Marshall College, or a skyscraper for William Grist. That's a lot of information you have to accumulate and then apply to a safe building. He did all of that, 54 different types of buildings. At the age of 24, he won the commission, a design award to design Lancaster's Southern Market. You're familiar with that building? Beautiful Southern Market. At the age of 24, he does that. I call it high-end Queen Anne architecture. Very detailed, very elaborate, high school diploma, tied for last place. I, on the other hand, was accepted to Penn State, the only university to accept me, the only one that had one math course required, thank goodness. But I did graduate with honors, so don't be afraid, I'm okay. And when I was 24 and working for and apprenticing at the age of 24, I rolled out not the Southern Market, but I rolled out Lee's Hoagie House in Quakertown, Pennsylvania. Anybody ever hear of Quakertown? It's on Route 309, heading north on the left side. Do me a favor, run into it, I'll pay you to take me out of my misery. Now, imagine, who would you hire? 24-year-old comes in, here's my portfolio. The next 24 comes in, here's my portfolio. It's pretty clear, isn't it, that there's some uniqueness about this guy called Urban and not Scott. So here we go. Next thing you know, I'm starting to study this guy. I'm doing some lectures locally. And at the end of one of my talks, this young lady came up to me, Deb Osh. She said, great presentation, but I think you could use some help. Well, are you offending me? Or is that what she meant? Was she was offering to me free research. She knew I was passionate about urban. She knew I was not a researcher by nature. That's what she does. She's a genealogist. So she jumped on board with me in 2018 and started researching as much as she could find. When we started, and I call her Deb the Digger, because really that's what she does. So when we started in 2018, there was one periodical in the city of Lancaster by the Preservation Trust. And in that periodical, it had like a listing, about 4 pages, of 94 projects that the city knew urban had done. And that included Lancaster and Hershey and maybe some other small areas. So there were 94 that we started with. Then a year later in 2019, Lancaster newspaper opened their archives to searchable, digitized access. So now she could go in and she could type CM Lynn Urban, and the computer would spew forth all these newspaper articles that had Urban's name in it. And we went, within 48 months, we went from 94 projects by CM Lynn Urban to 781 in 48 months. That was a lot of reading for a guy that doesn't like to read. And that was amazing. All of a sudden, it's just doors are blowing off everywhere, going, how can someone do that much work in this community? So then what happened is Deb she ran the dry well. The well went dry. She went through all the newspapers and all the surrounding communities and emptied them. Then she had the bright idea, well, I'm going to start looking in trade journals. Every profession has trade journals. Well, the trade journals she started looking through took us to 903. And that's in 4 weeks. She just started this brainstorm in 4 weeks. So I don't know where it's going to end, but it is so far over the top of normal for a practicing architect to have that with only a staff of 7. Frank Lloyd Wright John had probably 45 to 50 people, and he did far, far, far fewer commissions. Isn't that amazing? So case in point, and this last exercise of trade journals has just taken me to another orbit. The one that came just 2 weeks ago, she found an American Carpenter and Builder magazine from 1916. She found a photograph in there advertising asbestos shingles on this building. And it turns out underneath the photograph, there was a name, CM Lynn Urban, Lancaster, PA. And the building was this one. It was a garage and livery stable for Milton Hershey. Is that gorgeous? He never did a stable like this. This is the first time he did anything like that I saw. And today, ladies and gentlemen, today, January 24th, exactly 114 years ago today, that beautiful building burned to the ground. Found a newspaper story that said on this date in 114 years ago, 1911, it burned. Isn't that amazing? And they rebuilt it, and better. So these are the kinds of things that we're finding recently. These trade journals are opening all kinds of doors for our research on urban. Lost and found's a fun one. So the way we're going to break this down today, that was the background on urban. Lost and found, I'm going to share with you the buildings that we discovered we didn't know we did, because they're fun. You know, who cares about the Southern Market or the Grace Building or Wattenshan? Big deal. They are big deals, but these are bigger deals. Lost and found, we're going to do that. And then John said, can you talk a little bit about what he may have done in E-Town? Yes, we'll do that. And then we'll finish with his relationship with some guy named Milton Hershey. How's that? All right, so lost and found. What's his age here? 21 years old. He did a beautiful fire station in downtown Lancaster. Is that gorgeous? Where's he getting his information? High school? And Willis Gaylord Hale, the crazy architect in Philly? That is a beautiful fire station. And what I like about this is integrated into a residential street. So he was sensitive to that. When you walk past that, that's a nice facade. It's a firehouse. Doesn't have to be that pretty, but it is.
So the bottom are doors?
Those are doors. They don't look like doors, but those are the doors that open up and those fire engines get backed in there. The guy was a genius, bottom line. He was incredible. Deb discovered this one recently. He was 25. This is the same year that he was doing the Southern Market. This building is stunning, and it's what we call a Romanesque revival, which one of those 21 styles that he understood and did. It was right to the Brunswick Hotel in downtown Lancaster. It was taken down in the 1960s to put up a parking garage. There wasn't anything wrong with it, but they needed a parking garage, so they took it down. Incredible. This is a beautiful service station that he did on West Orange Street. It was taken down to put up a mini-mart in Spanish revival. So the guy was doing everything, but everything unimaginable with his work. Then we discover, and I always wondered, I wonder if he did anything in Rocky Springs Amusement Park. Sure enough, we found out that he did. And he didn't do the roller coaster because he wasn't that smart. But he did do the summer theater. When he was 40 years old in 1903, he did a 2,000-seat summer theater in a Greek revival architectural style. We even have his drawings that he did for that beautiful building. It's gone. It's not there today. That's why we're calling it Lost and Found. But he never stopped. And you notice on the upper left, that's some of his printing style. He had a very distinctive print. He did the Lancaster Park out near, remember where Donnelly Printing is or was, out near the Park City area? There was a Lancaster recreational park out there. And he was the architect for the buildings, including this, I think that's about 4,000 person stadium. So he designed one stadium in his career, and then he put all that knowledge on the shelf and never did another one. He designed a cow barn for Milton Hershey in 1901 when Milton decided to leave Lancaster and start his new vision and his new town. He needed a cow barn. So Urban, you'll understand their relationship in a minute. Sam and Urban did all of his work. Everything that Milton Hershey had a dream, his architect was C.M. Urban. He did all of that work while he was doing all of Lancaster's work at the same time, with a staff of 7. He did a skating rink for Captain People. How about that for a name? Captain People's Skating Rink. This was also down at the Rocky Springs. It was the longest indoor skating rink in the world when he did it. He just never stopped. He designed the longest single building in the United States in 1896 for the Staley Silk Mill Company. It was the second longest building in the world. Lancaster, tied for last place. I just can't get over that. I mean, it tells me it's not all about academics, is it? He didn't fit the normal mold for learning and excelling in academics. And of course, that building is still there. And there is Mr. Staley in his New York City office. And that relationship was so strong and so powerful with the silk mill companies. He ended up doing silk mills in Virginia, North Carolina, several in Pennsylvania, because of that relationship. The folks at the Staley Silk executives loved him so much, they actually hired C.M. Urban to build mansions for them in Connecticut, and that's one of them. Imagine that. So and this is all, this is like early 1900s, and there they are today. There's 3 of them. The third one's off to the right, but there's 3 mansions in a row, all for these executives of the Staley Silk Mill Company. Pretty amazing. It's all gated. I couldn't go in, otherwise I was going to introduce myself. So what do we have in E-Town? Well, Deb Osh, my digger, has at this point identified 12. Now, I was saying at my table, on the drive in here, coming in on Market Street, I can tell you right now, it's far beyond 12. These are only civic buildings. You notice they're all public buildings. Just driving in on Market Street, I identified at least 5 residences that I can tell you are Urban's work. 5. Whenever you see a mansion done in gold brick, see Emlyn Urban. That was his favorite color. When you see turrets, when you see oval windows, see Emlyn Urban. He has signatures that he uses, and it's very easy to identify. So these are the ones, and of course the Moose Lodge. I love that building. I've looked at that for years. 1924, and it's a I would call it Romanesque revival because of the large arches on it. That gives it the Roman definition. And this is a postcard, I believe. Am I right? Postcard, photo/postcard. And I'm looking at this because one of the curiosities on that building drives me nuts. Is right there, which is the moose. And when you look at it, there's a spotlight on the moose. It's like hanging over its antlers. But the historic postcard from 1924 has the same light. You see that? It was authentic. That's the original goofy light. I hate it. I mean, it comes down over the cast stone. It didn't even, there's like awful. If we had a ladder, I'm going to take it down. So I have a question. What is meat bingo? Does anybody have an idea? I need help here. Meat, not meet me at the bingo. Meat bingo. Anybody know what that is? Who?
Instead of winning like purses, like they have purse bingo or basket bingo.
You win a side of beef? Oh my gosh. All right, we learn something new every day. So Elizabethtown had a number of shoe operations. You know that? Yeah, so one of them was Withers, is that right? Shoe company design. Again, these are Emlyn Urban's designs. I love when they show the old automobiles in them. So this would be neo-industrial. I just made that style up. Obviously, it's industrial. Now, back at that point in time, bringing natural light in was paramount. Electrical lighting was nothing like we have today. So that's why the window openings were as aggressive as they could be because of the need for natural light to come in. Look at this. I blew up the upper right. It says makers of Skeezix shoes. Did anyone ever hear Skeezix shoes? Google it. He's Googling. I knew you would Google it because I can tell your personality type. Now, I Googled it before I came here, but I Googled Skeezix shoes. I didn't say Skeezix shoes vintage or... It's not coming up, but I would love to know what a Skeezix shoe is. Karen's looking it up too. I knew you would too, Karen. You're a sucker. Okay, so he was also the architect for the Kreider family, and this guy's name was, Aaron Schenk Kreider. This was a major, major shoe operation. Probably the second largest employer of folks in E-Town to the Masonic. I'm sure it was, because look at the size of that plant. Look at that smokestack spewing out that black soot. But the Kreider Shoe Company was immense in 1905. Now, on the far right side, do you see that? That's a church spire. One thing I learned about Urban in researching him, in his growth as an architect, he had no problem tearing buildings down to put his own up. Case in point, that church spire is right there. It belonged to, it's the old Church of God, and it was built in 1853, and it was torn down by Mr. Urban and the congregation so that Mr. Urban could put up his church in the same footprint. So he had no reservation about tearing an old building. He did it all over Lancaster. Wherever you see a building in Lancaster that's Urban's, there was another building in its footprint. Trust me. So that's kind of how he made his living, tearing things down and building them up. So that building's still here. Is that on market? Yeah. Right. It's a beautiful building. But I can tell you what I should have done was put in the church that Urban designed for his own congregation in Lancaster. It's a knockoff. It's made of stone. This one's brick. But it's the same partay, as we say, right, John? Exactly the same. I think one of his favorite ones is this is the only one that he did on the Masonic campus for the Allegheny Lodge. Beautiful. And if you Google Allegheny, it comes up spelled different ways. In historic photographs, it's E-N-Y. This one is A-N-Y. I don't know. You go to Wikipedia, it's A-N-Y. It's all over the map. But what a gorgeous building. One of my favorites. Now, obviously, this is before the trees. Today, it is so settled in with the, the drapes of limbs and leaves and shadows and textures. And in English Gothic style, another one of his 21 styles that he did. And of course, the Masons have their own quarry. So all the stone is exactly the same for all the stone buildings on their campus. And then Urban was given access to that quarry. It's one of my favorite buildings, period. Now notice the lanterns here are nice, not like on the lodge. Does anyone know anything about the Exchange Bank of E-Town? Does it still exist? This is just a news clipping that Deb the Digger got for me. She can tell she found it June 26, 1914 is when the newspapers indicated that Urban was the lucky man. You see that? He was the lucky man. But I would love to find a photograph of it. John, maybe it's in your local library. They might have it. Because I need to do more work. E-Town is so close. I need to get serious. These are other ones. The high school's still here, right? Yeah. Is it still a high school?
It's now the Gears Community Center.
Is it? Would you, on a scale of 1 to 10, John, architectural style, how would you rate it 1 to 10?
I give it a 6 or 7.
Really? Okay. Anybody else?
It's kind of got that 1920s, 1930s
Okay.
style.
What about the telephone building? Anybody know what that is or where it was? Still there? Scale of 1 to 10.
1.
Well, there's nothing like being unanimous. So I could actually.
You can see that. Yeah, it had windows at one time.
I'm going to see it while I'm in town today.
Yeah, if you go north on Market Street like you go to Middletown, you'll find it.
So keep going this way.
It had windows.
Well, it's bad. I'm going to call it what it is. I'll call it a loser on my next presentation. The Mechanics National Bank. Did you ever hear of that? I've never heard of it. How about the laundry? Geisinger Laundry. Did you ever hear of that? Well, we're going to find what these are, and I want to add to this collection.
If the Geisinger Laundry is the laundry that was out on the top bill.
Is it a
Which, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
what? You're in an urban building?
It's the old Masonic Laundry building. Yeah. Do you know where Whisk Cafe is?
No.
It's very close.
Is it? How is it in terms of pretty?
I think it's beautiful.
Ooh, it's not a loser.
It's not a loser. Huge windows. And, yeah.
Okay. Can we talk after? I need to go see that while I'm here.
By
This
the
is-
railroad tracks. Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right.
That's the old Masonic power.
Well, yeah, that's another question. I wonder if Urban designed a little railroad station. I don't have any evidence of that. He did them for Milton Hershey.
Since I work for a bank, I need to look this up. The Elizabethtown Exchange Bank opened in the Brethren A.G. Heisey building at 244 South Market.
Brothers Pizza.
Is it still? It's a pizza shop.
The Heisey building is a urban house.
It's 244 South Market.
244 South Market is now Bath. It's now
Greenmaker? Oh, I'll find out.
244 South Market.
It's a kind of a nondescript.
Could be an urban.
I don't know, maybe.
We'll find out. This is fun. What else? I think we covered the others, but I'm telling you, there's a host of residences that we need to get on here. So that'll be one of my charges to Deb Osh, my researcher.
That is Greenmaker. What's the old exchange bank? Looks like a.
I mean, is that a photo of it?
That's 244. Looks just like a house.
It doesn't look like an urban, yeah. Let's try again. That was awful. All right. Now, I'm going to finish up with, John said, maybe talk a little bit about his relationship with Milton Hershey. So the next book, the third book, I have 2 finished so far. The third one is going to be Urban and the Chocolate King. So Milton Hershey was given the nickname the Chocolate King internationally, not just by us locally. And so there they are as young men. Interestingly, Milton Hershey came from a very dysfunctional family, shall we say. That's his, obviously, Henry, and then his mother, Fanny Snavely Hershey, both Mennonites. Her father was a bishop in the Mennonite order, came from a lot of money, a lot of wealth. Henry, on the other hand, came from a family of moderate wealth. Henry was older than Fanny. They fell in love. She was infatuated with him. She saw him as a sort of a free spirit, this guy that was worldly. He was always sort of overdressed for the occasion. He would hold himself properly, and she just was mesmerized by this older gentleman. They fell in love, married, and it was awful. He shows up. They got married in the Trinity Church in Lancaster, so they really are Lancastrians. He was born in Derry Township. She was born in Lancaster County. And at a very young age, they separated. Milton Hershey never made it past 4th grade. He was in and out of schools. The relationship with his mom and dad was horrible. It just went terribly south. And so basically she said to Henry, "Henry, we're done." And she declared him dead, even though he was living. So it's like, okay. So she brought young Milton Hershey back to Lancaster City, and that's where she raised him along with her sister. So they raised this young guy, and that's where he went to a candy store on King Street and learned the business of making candy. So he did that apprenticing for 4 to 5 years under Mr. Royer. And at that time, when he was about 18 or 19, he left, and he traveled around the United States to these different cities that you see on the screen. And he was looking, he was actually in some respects following his loser dad. His loser would have these grandiose ideas on how to make money and ended up losing money all the time. But Milton was sort of smitten with his father and was curious about his father. So his father would say, "Hey, Milton, come on out to Colorado. They know how to make caramel out here. They're making caramel with milk." So Milton gets on a train, goes out to Denver, Colorado in the early 1900s and learns how to put caramel or milk into caramel. So he's collecting ideas as he moves. 24 months he went around the United States to these different locations. At the age of 26, he comes back to Lancaster City in 1883. And he starts the Lancaster Caramel Company. That's what started his whole operation. And he stayed in Lancaster, believe it or not, until he was 43. Most people don't know that. Most people think that he's sort of a Hershey guy, town of Hershey. No, he didn't go there till he was 43 years old. So Lancaster, really, we had our arms around him for many, many years. And the first thing he did when he got back was start a caramel factory. He needed a building, so he did that. And the building on the immediate right was the building that he purchased. It was already there. Also in 1883 is the same year that 20-year-old C. Ellen Urban came back to his hometown. That's when they met. They met in 1883. Milton was older, and the first thing that Milton did was he hired young Urban to design the addition to that factory. You see the fancy parapet on the top? Urban could do nothing simple, always had to be fun. So we're going to make a little sandcastle parapet on the top there. And that's where they stayed in Lancaster until they shut the operation down in the early 1900s. One of the early projects that 27-year-old Urban did was he designed Milton Hershey's mansion for him. Milton was a bachelor at the age of 32, and Milton moved into this little mansion. Little. It had 25 rooms in it. It was huge. He lived there with his mother, Fanny. So Urban's only 27 when he does that in the year 1890. So from 1903 until Urban died in 1939, they did all the architecture and all the layout of the town of Hershey. Everything in Hershey, from a field of cows and corn to a town that we see today, they did together. And historic photographs here, you can see that building in the middle. This one right here, you see that? That's a little mansion that C.L. Urban designed for Fanny, his mother. So Fanny Hershey would sit in that building, and the workers would bring baskets of Hershey Kisses over, and she would sit at the kitchen table and put foil on them. Seriously. Now, unfortunately, you talk about lost architecture. That building is no longer there. Actually, all the buildings you see in that photograph are all gone except for the one on the far left, which is the bank. Unfortunately, everything you see in that photograph is Urban's designs. He designed every factory, every smokestack, every hotel. He designed dormitories. He designed gymnasiums. He designed banks. You name any building you need for a healthy, viable community, C.L. Urban was the architect. He did the theater. He did the convention center in 1915 in Spanish Revival architecture. Gorgeous buildings. That's the theater he designed. He actually designed the Hotel Hershey up on the hill in 1913. Milton commissioned him to design a 400-room hotel. We're still in the research on that because he designed it in 1913, 1914, and 1915. Drawings must exist somewhere. We haven't found them. But they went in a drawer because of World War I. Milton put everything on hold because of the war effort. And they did not resurrect the Hotel Hershey on the hill until 1930. Urban was at his later age, and he ended up not doing that one. Some guy from E-Town did it. Did you ever hear Whitmer? D. Paul Whitmer, an architect from here? Yeah, scallywag. Took my guy's work. And so anyway, on this building, Urban did all the drawings also in 1913. In this case, they went in the drawer, but when they pulled it out after World War, they built it exactly the way Urban designed it. So if you go into that building, that is Urban's design. It was not monkeyed with by this E-Town guy. There's Paul Whitmer. I don't like you. He looks very distinguished. I'm not saying he's not. I mean, he looks very credible. I like him. All in all, till the day was done and his career was finished, Milton and C.M. Urban designed over 160 buildings in that town. 100 of them were houses. But they're all basically there. It was phenomenal. Milton Hershey went to England because he wanted the town of Hershey to be unique. He wanted to be an avant industrial town like never before seen in the United States. So he went to the Cadbury people, Cadbury chocolate, outside of London. And they had a town called Bournesville, which was designed to support, encourage, and make employees feel like this is the best job in their life. And so he replicated Bournesville, England, here in Hershey, PA. Tree-lined streets, sidewalks. He would build houses for the employees as part of thank you for working for me. It's phenomenal what they did together. That'll all be part of the next book that we're working on. So there they are at an older age. C.M. Urban on the left, he died at the age of 76 in 1939. And Milton Hershey on the right outlived him to 1945. I was at one part, in my early part of research, I called them friends for life. They were really friends. They were truly professional, John, how would you say, client and owner. They didn't socialize together. They did so much work together. They never went to parties together. They never went to any social events together. It was really kind of arm's length. You're my architect, serve me well, and I'll take care of you type of thing. Personalities, never a bad thing written about C.M. Urban, and never a bad thing written about Milton Hershey. Both of them were incredibly talented in their respective careers. One interesting difference I see with all the work that C.M. Urban accomplished, over 900 buildings at this point, his headstone at the cemetery in Lancaster is, I mean, really, it's a piece of granite with urban on it. There's nothing heroic about it. It's just beautiful. It's simple. On the other hand, Milton Hershey is a little more robust. So we have CM and Urban, and then we have Milton. CM and Urban, and then we have Urban. I mean, seriously, big difference there. So at the end of the day, I've finished 2 books. I'm on my 3rd book now. I have them both here if you're interested. The Urban Alphabet is the offspring of the big book. The big book is Urban Legend. It rolled out in November of 23. I think, November of 2023. And it's a compendium of 25 of Urban's most significant work. And it's the only one ever written about our city's architecture in Lancaster, and the only one ever written about urban. So it's quite unique. And then the Urban Legend is the offspring. It's affordable and portable, I call it, because it's lightweight. It's an alphabet from A to Z. I've taken letter A, assign an architectural name to it. B for, say, broken pediment. D for diaper, believe it or not, is an architectural word. And so you go through this dictionary and I show you what they are. So when you're walking around your community, you know what you're looking at in terms of an architectural detail. It was a lot of fun to do. It didn't take that long, not as long as the big Urban Legend book. That's it. Thank you. Any questions? Yes, Marty.
I'm not sure this is fair, but
Everything's fair.
that downtown Hershey doesn't really have a downtown like the store and stuff like that. Was that part of? I mean, have you any thoughts on that? Or?
The question is, downtown Hershey does not really have like a core, right? It's basically a road running through it, and don't get run over. Thank you very much. That's a good question, and I haven't gotten that far into the research. The earliest maps and drawings we have of Hershey basically show it the way it exists today. It shows it just as it's kind of like straight as an arrow shot from one end of town to the other, and a couple cross intersections. But you're right, it doesn't really have a personality. Certainly now, maybe it did at one time. When you look at the earlier photograph, Marty, that looks pretty appealing. Where is that? Right here. That looks pretty appealing.
But still, it's not
But all the
stores.
trees are gone. There's nothing there.
It's not stores like you would see the typical.
No. Well, that first building on the right, that's actually a store. Then they put 2 more floors on the top and made the whole thing a hotel downtown. There was a trolley running up and down the middle of the street. This is a Hershey's Bank on the left. So back in the day, it was it was not all commercial. The main street had houses and mansions on it. It was pretty cool. Yes.
Where did C.M. Urban live? And is his house still exist?
Yeah, his residence was at Buchanan Park near F&M. He designed it when he was 52, so it took him that long to have time to build something for he and his wife Jenny. Their kids were grown and gone till he built it.
Still exists?
Oh, it's still there. It's beautiful. Understated. I mean, really, for the things that he was able to do, it's like a colonial house. It's like I call it his grilled cheese sandwich. What's wrong with you? You could have done anything. You do a grilled cheese sandwich and tomato soup. It was comfort food. Yeah. Yes.
So you said you saw buildings that you are sure of.
Oh, definitely.
In Eaton.
Oh, yeah.
Is it possible there were imitators and bad actors?
There weren't that many, actually. If there was an imitator, it was Urban. He would, in John's and my profession, we would have commissions sometimes. Our practice, RLPS, was 38 states, so we were spread out like glue everywhere, and we would often, under the radar, deliver what we call a drawer job. In other words, if it was in a couple states away, we would repeat a design. Right, John? Change the color, the brick, or whatever. But, you know, if it's not broken, why fix it? But there were imitators. Samuel Urban, I mean, where he grew up and the time frame he grew up, in the city and county of Lancaster, he really only had 2 other architects. And they weren't even close to him in terms of production or capability. And yes, there's a few buildings in Lancaster City that fool me. One fooled me for a number of years. I thought it was Urban. Then Deb found a newspaper story Said, no, that's Harry. Whatever. Yes.
When you talked about the Elizabethtown High School being years ago, are you not talking about the one that burned down West High Street? That is now a park. No, because have you seen pictures of that building?
Was it pretty?
Beautiful. Yeah, it was
That was on what street?
Park Street, or High Street,
High.
and the lot forward. The high school was built behind that building.
Okay.
It became an elementary school. And it burned down twice. One time around 1911,
Wow.
and then another time.
Well, this would be in your museum, right? Or your historic.
I think I got a picture of it in my phone.
Do you really? Well, you have an assignment.
I'll give you my phone. You can look it up.
That sounds appealing to me. Because when I saw the high school, at least online, it's no big deal.
But what am I talking about? The current high school?
Not the current high school, no. Yeah, it's defunct right now. Yeah. Another arm? Yes.
So have you, in your practice of architect, have you used any of Urban's like influences in your practice?
Any influences?
Did he influence your practice?
Did he influence my practice? Not really, because I didn't start studying him until I was wrapped up at RLPS. The only thing I can tell you that I did was unknowingly, I shut down his Southern Market in 1986. Unknowingly, I didn't know who Urban was. I didn't care. The building needed.
You should explain how you shut it.
How did I shut it down?
Well, what Greg was.
Oh, president of City Council?
President of City Council.
Yeah, so the city of Lancaster owned the Southern Market, and it was all markets in the city that were done in the 1890s. Markets came to an end as a viable entity in the city when supermarkets came along. People didn't have to go to a farmer's market to get they could go to a supermarket. And so they ended up not being useful buildings. And all of them, either they shut down in the early 1930s, 1940s, and they became showrooms for automobiles. And most of them were garages or something, but they weren't farmers markets. They held on to the Southern Market and they kept it open. John worked there as a young boy, and it ended up being open one day a week. That's it. The other days, the city had no money to keep it from failing and deteriorating. So he said, let's close it. Let's close it and turn it into something else. We'll unload it. So council at that time was divided. It came to a split decision, 3 yes, 3 no. As president, I had to make it the final tiebreaker, and I said, close it. People booed me, people applauded, it was like you can't win for losing type of thing. And so we closed it, then it became the Chamber of Commerce building, and it became City Council chambers. So it kept on, and now it's been completely reinvented. Again, in this case, RLPS did it.
You said Urban had a house on Buchanan Park. Was that a Tudor house?
No, it was a colonial, Georgian colonial, 2-story, very simple, we call it a 5-bay, meaning 2 windows on the left, a door, 2 windows on the right, 2 stories. Very simple, very grilled cheese. Tasty.